Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone, wherever you are. I'm really excited to have all of you as part of this set of two webinars, or two sessions, I should say. And so we're going to do in this first one, we're looking at doing two things. So the one part is going to be around learning some key principles for designing online workshops and collaborations. And just to clarify, what we're doing now is a webinar. What we'll be doing in the second part is a digital workshop where people will be doing kind of interactive activities in a digitally distributed way. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the approaches that we use at my class at Stanford, but also when running digital workshops, and how you can actually start applying them or thinking about applying them in your own context. So we're going to spend the first half of the session today on that. And then the second half of the session is going to be to discuss some of your questions about developing online workshops and conferences. I see that people have already discovered the Q&A function. Fantastic. We're going to keep using that, as well as the chat function in certain parts of the session today. The second part is going to be, which we're doing on Thursday, is going to be a digital workshop. So we're going to try an online workshop experience. We're going to discuss some more of your questions, but it'll be really a chance to go hands-on with some of the different techniques and approaches that we are talking about today. So let's get started. And what I'd love to do is to just get people to turn on their video cameras. I think that turning on video cameras is really just one of the fundamental things that you can do that makes a workshop experience or a webinar something that is much more human and makes us feel more connected. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to switch to my Zoom window. Johanna, are we able to see the participants?
I hope so. They should be able to enable their video. Saying that, we might not be able to.
Ah, okay. Maybe we're not set up for that option yet. Well, in that case, we're going to do this as part. No problem. We're going to do this as part of the workshop experience. So this will be one of the things that I'll tell you a little bit about it. This will be one of those things that we get to try and practice in the second part. I love to start off these kinds of sessions with a little video activity, exercise, or energizer. These are some of our students at the D.school. Our class is called Design Across Borders, which is also a DAB, if you're familiar with that. There are a lot of fun things that you can just do with the webcam. You can take an object and potentially pass it to someone in the grid square next to you, all these sorts of things. It's a great way, and it's a fun way just to get started in a session. But we'll try that out in practice in the next part. Now, one of the first things I just want to talk about is when it comes to taking workshops and conferences to digital, that there is no direct translation in many cases. So I think one of the biggest mistakes or challenges around taking workshops and conferences into a digital format is that there's an attempt to actually just take the same format but run it as a webinar, run it as a session to deliver content. But really, there are many things that we actually will want to think about. How do we redesign those things for a digital format? The good news is that well-designed online workshops can actually be better than face-to-face workshops. And there are a lot of different ways that that can be true. And that's something that I've kind of discovered over the last few years of running the Design Across Borders class and increasingly doing digital consultations, online consultations, workshops and conferences, that actually this is an opportunity to have more structured conversations. One of the things that's really wonderful about the digital format is that you can have a very guided approach to running conversations, where you can prevent people from kind of talking over each other, where you can make sure that you're making progress around some of the key objectives that you're having by putting some of those things in writing, having conversation about the things that everyone is looking at, and really bringing some more structure and progress to those conversations. Two is you can actually create more accountability for participants. So if you imagine an in-person workshop, there might be different groups of people in different parts of the room that are working on flip charts or canvases. And you as a facilitator can't see what is the progress of all of those groups. You have to go and visit each of the groups to do that. Sometimes because of time challenges, it's not always possible. In a digital workshop, you can see everyone's canvases and everyone's progress at the same time. The other thing is if people are coming in and participating, usually they'll be more prepared when they do a check-in session. So this is just something I found running the digital workshops, which kind of surprised me, is actually people were much more prepared when they stepped up and wanted to say something because they had thought a little bit about it. They knew that they were going to prepare at this particular moment. And the last piece that I really love about digital workshops and conferences is that you end up with some well-documented actionable outputs, right? You're not trying to take photos of flip charts with, sentences that are half written on those flip charts and trying to figure out, oh, what did these people write down? You actually have a digital canvas in many cases that contains all of the results and the things that were talked about as part of the workshop. So these are three things that I think are really different about digital workshops, and some things that you can actually leverage as advantages in a digital format. We often think about digital as being a kind of a worse experience than in person, but I actually think there are many ways in which it can be better. I'm just going to take a quick look at the chat to see what's going on. Nope, looks like we are good to go. So I'll talk about a couple of different contexts in which we're already applying some of these approaches. So Design Across Borders is, as I mentioned, is the class that we teach at Stanford. This term, it's a 10-week class where participants actually are going to be doing design research together. So we have a group of participants, a group of students in Palo Alto at Stanford, and then a group of students that are going to be in the Philippines, in Manila, and they are collaborating across geographic borders to design kind of new approaches and interventions around a challenge that we've selected. As part of that, they're doing research, they're doing synthesis, they're doing interviews together, they're building on each other's data sets, and that's something that's really possible in these contexts. This is a photo of one of our previous classes and kind of participants collaborating around that. We're doing a lot of work around this in the UN context as well. So this was a couple of weeks ago, working with about 90 people from the UNDP Accelerator Labs network, just to do a quick kind of survey. Oh, sorry, this is not with this is with 90 people in the Global Accelerator Labs network. Just to do a quick analysis of what's the situation that people are seeing around COVID-19. An hour-long session, what we did is we kind of mapped out where people's countries stood in terms of how much action they're taking and how ready those countries are. And then we started pulling out some of the things that people were seeing. How are they seeing people coping in their countries? How are organizations coping, and what are some of the new unexpected behaviors that they're seeing? And then we drew those out into kind of opportunities and risks for country partners and for UNDP. We did this all in an hour-long session with 90 people. Actually something that's very challenging to do with an in-person workshop, something that you can do in a digital workshop. This is working with some country office teams. We did this as a three-part workshop where we got them to kind of map out what were some of the signals of change that they were seeing in their different countries around social, technological, environmental, economic, and political kind of areas, both looking at sort of emerging or weak signals and strong signals of change, and then working them all the way down into a set of kind of signals to watch out for in the Asia-Pacific region. So we're using this in a number of UN contexts. This is a team just this evening that took some of the results of one of my previous workshops on running digital workshops, and they just ran a solutions mapping session with 50 women entrepreneurs in India. So this post is directly from this evening. I haven't looked at it very closely, but very cool to see kind of engaging grassroots stakeholders, not just sort of UN colleagues in these sorts of exercises. And then the last thing I'll say is that we can do this in large formats as well. So my co-teacher for Design Across Borders runs a conference that's about 150 people with the Thailand Institute for Justice and UNODC. As part of this conference, people are designing solutions to a variety of different justice challenges, ranging from social reintegration, gender-based violence, access to justice for vulnerable groups. They're not just sort of sitting in for talks, but they're actually teams from different parts of Asia that are collaborating and designing solutions around these different challenges. Now, what I want to do is I want to start with a question for you folks. And my question is, what do you think is the best setup for running an interactive digital workshop or conferences? These are 3 possible setups. So the first setup is a connected setup. And that's where you have 2 rooms with 2 groups of people that might be connected through a video conferencing facility. So one room in one location, another room in another location, people in those rooms, and then those 2 rooms connecting using a video conferencing facility. The second setup is a mixed setup. So you've got a room, you've got some people in that room who are collaborating together, and then you have some people who are dialing in. And the third setup is a distributed setup where everyone is dialing in and there's no one that's in a room together. So if you can go ahead and type into the chat, which of these setups do you think is the best? Got distributed from Kyron. Flavia, distributed. It depends. Distributed, distributed. Wow, lots of distributed. Mixed, depends. Distributed, depends. Mixed. Contextual. Mixed or distributed. I think it could depend where people are and what they're trying to do. Okay, so I'm gonna start with the worst setup. The worst setup is mixed. And I think you've all been in this situation, is you've got a room of people and then you're dialing in and the people in the room can easily have a back and forth conversation. Their communication is pretty seamless, right? And then you're trying to get into that conversation and it's very difficult because you're not in the room. You may not be following. Someone in the room gets up and they write something on the whiteboard and none of the people who are dialed in can see what was written, right? That is the worst setup because it puts people on very, very different footing as participants in an online workshop or conference or collaboration. The connected setup has some of the same challenges, right? So if one room is larger than another room, if one room has a leadership team and the other room doesn't, you can quickly imagine that you start to get that same kind of dynamic too. People aren't in equal footing in a connected setup. I often find that actually the distributed setup is the setup that puts really every participant on an equal footing when it comes to taking part in a workshop. And it's a setup that works really, really well. And yes, so I see some people saying it requires good internet connection. Absolutely. And in some cases, connected setup, it can be used if you don't have access to strong internet facilities. But I'll be happy to, I learned about some interesting experiences around doing online collaboration and digital workshops with low internet connectivity, and I'll be happy to talk a little bit about that in the Q&A. Let's talk about some takeaways, I guess we could say, from the work that we've been doing with the Design Across Borders sessions and all the digital workshops that we've been designing. I'll put these as kind of a set of key design principles or tips around how to design online digital workshops. And the first one is really to make it a human experience. So I love when bringing people together to get everyone to turn on their cameras. I think that it makes such a huge difference to see a face behind the person. It really also it focuses people's attention. It's much harder to actually walk away from your computer in different parts of a conference or a program when you've got the video on. And from the person who's speaking point of view, one of the things that's really disconcerting is you don't even know if the person that is that you're speaking to is actually there or they're listening or anything like that. In an in-person conversation, we're looking at the person we're speaking to understand whether they're paying attention and whether we have their attention. So really, I think turning on cameras is a really important thing. I realize it's countercultural for many organizations and in the UN system, but I can see slowly colleagues are starting to do it, and it makes a really big difference in the conversations. The second piece is around using breakout rooms. And breakout rooms is a feature in Zoom, but also in some other video conferencing software, which is just a really fantastic feature. And it allows you to take a group of people, let's say 30 people, and you can put them into a whole number of different breakout rooms where they can have smaller video conversations with each other, right? So if you imagine a workshop, we have a similar kind of layout where you have some sessions that are plenary and then some sessions are group work. Using breakout rooms, you can get people to do group work at the same time in different groups. You can pop in to those different breakout rooms, and you can send messages to those breakout rooms. It is a feature that is absolutely fantastic and I think indispensable, and it really brings a more human scale to a workshop. So you can imagine at the beginning of a workshop, to get to people to know each other a little bit more, you could send them into breakout rooms to share something, to show an object that's around on their desk and tell the story behind it, or you can send them with a prompt to have a discussion around. Second piece is when you're designing a digital workshop or conference, you really want to go beyond an agenda to a process. So in a typical kind of agenda for a workshop, you're going to have blocks of time that are an hour and a half. We discuss topic X or Y. In a digital workshop, the challenge of engagement is much greater. You want to take those blocks and you really want to break them down into much smaller pieces. You're building 5 to 10 minute kind of micro activities all along the day. You are, every few minutes, you're switching views. A different speaker is coming in. There's a different type of activity that you're doing as a session. You're sending people into breakout rooms. You're bringing them back to share out in plenary. So you want to build a process and show, what is the set of activities that we're doing that really gets us to where we want to go. And so as part of that process, I like to think about 5 different modes for digital workshops. These are like the fundamental building blocks of a digital workshop. So one is a share out, and that's essentially what we're doing right now, right? So a share out is one person speaking and you have an audience. But you might also have a facilitated discussion where you have a facilitator who is essentially bouncing the discussion between a bunch of different people. Johanna, what did you think about that? And John, what do you think about what Johanna said? And tell me, Karen, what are your thoughts on what John and Johanna said? And so you are, as a facilitator, keeping that conversation going. You're facilitating a discussion between different people. Then you have silent collaboration, which is one of my favorite approaches, one of my favorite types of activities in a digital workshop. And that's where you have a group of people, they're all working on something together, but they're doing it quietly. So they're not essentially speaking out or lobbying each other for their ideas. They're quietly maybe putting down their ideas on Post-its, or they're putting them up, on a collaboration board or something like that, but they're all together doing that. Then you have out loud collaboration, where you might have a group of people having a discussion together in a breakout. And then lastly, you've got asynchronous. And so asynchronous is when you have people who go off and who go do work on their own and then come back and share what they've collected. So let's take a look at what that might look like, let's say in a session. Suppose that you wanted to do a brainstorm around how do we design more engaging digital workshops? Well, you might start off with some asynchronous work, right? So you might tell your participants, we're going to do some research individually to find examples of highly interactive online experiences. And then you're going to put them into a shared board that everyone can see. So you can see there the accountability, right? Everyone who looks at that shared board can see who's done their homework and who hasn't. And you might give people 2 days for that. So people will go and they say, you know what, I found this online game. It was a really great activity. I participated in this Facebook Live session. That was a really interesting and interactive activity, right? So you give them 2 days, they do asynchronous work. Then you come back and you start the session. You might do a share out. So everyone gets 2 minutes to share kind of what they felt was most interesting about the experience they found. Then you might have silent collaboration. So people, having seen all of these different inspirations, they might brainstorm. So they might write as many ideas as they can about improving digital workshops. And then you might have a silent vote for the ones that are the most popular ones. So you take 10 minutes, write down those ideas. People don't discuss them, they just write them down, and then 3 minutes for people to vote. I like silent collaboration in large part because I think it plays an equalizing role. Not all of us are extroverts. Some people are introverts. Some people, might want to take a little bit more time to think about their ideas, and really having some quiet time for everyone to write those down. And then for the group to have a look at what everything that has been written down, whether on your digital shared board or even in an in-person workshop. What that does is it means that the the loudest person isn't dominating that discussion, right? And then you might have an out loud collaboration, right? Now that we've picked some of the most implementable ideas, let's develop some potential combinations. Let's discuss those combinations and let's vote. So that could be 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, right? So that's a kind of an example of how you might run those. Now, those building blocks fit into kind of I always think of a workshop as having 3 acts to it, or any decision-making process really is having 3 acts to it. So the first act is kind of building a common understanding. So we need to get everyone on the same page, right? Is our business failing? If we don't all agree on the facts, then the choices that we're going to make in Act 2 are going to be very different, right? So first act is to build a common understanding. The second one is to shape choices. So what kinds of options do we have available to us to take action around this? And the third act is around making decisions, right? So these are the 3 acts, and you can think about your kind of micro building blocks of activities as fitting into these 3 acts and creating a process that you can string together to get to the end that you want. But these are all kind of 5, 10 minute, 15 minute type of activities that allow people to kind of quickly switch between what they're doing and really keep them engaged. I'm going to take a quick look at some of the Q&A and see if there's anything directly related to this. Otherwise, we'll take the questions a little bit further at the end. Is it possible?
And Kal,
I should take them at the end.
Yeah, let's go through it. You're on a nice flow there.
Okay, sure. One of the most popular kind of questions when I tell people about taking workshops and conferences online is, gosh, how can you keep people sitting down for 2 days? Well, the truth is you don't keep people sitting down for 2 days. In a digital workshop or conference, you're going to program in breaks every 60 to 90 minutes, 5, 10 minute breaks to go to the washroom, pick up snacks, take a stretch, whatever it is. It's very feasible and it's very possible to do it, right? But I have to emphasize, it's very possible to take a 2-day potentially even a 3-day, if it's well-designed workshop, and into a digital format, have it really engaging and have it really productive. Sometimes, and I often recommend this, workshops can be broken into half days. So you can do several half days so people aren't spending too much time in front of their screens or computers. This is what the early version of our Design Across Borders class looked like, and what you're seeing here is that people are doing some activities synchronously, so they're doing them together, and then some activities asynchronously. So for example, getting to know each other, preparing the interview guides, that was done synchronously. But then the teams in different countries would then go do field research separately. They would sync up and have a discussion about what they found in their separate kind of user interviews or interviews of different people on the ground. And then they do more field research separately. They might download their interview results. So what that means is to take some of the key quotes and to put them in a board or into a document that they share. And then they might sync up after that, right? So you have this kind of activities together, but activities apart, and activities together, and so on and so forth. And so you don't necessarily have to have people in front of the computer or the screen, especially for a multi-week design process all the time. So next design principle around creating digital workshops is to leverage multitasking productively. We've all done this ourselves. I think we're all guilty of it, is checking email during conference calls, right? Or whatever it is, multitasking during conference calls. And the truth is that just having voice is not enough input for people to be actively engaged. You need voice, you need video, and people's minds still need something to keep them occupied even after those 2 things. And that's why we'll often have something that participants are looking at together, not necessarily each other, but something that they might be working on together, a product or something that they're creating jointly. So it could be that participants are coming together to map a user experience, right? What is the experience around using this product or service? This is the format that some of our students in the Design Across Borders class use. They'll have their computer, and then that is the interface where they're collaborating on something. In this case, it's a mural. And then they'll have their phone to do a video call. So a multi-screen setup is actually very, if you can do it, is very useful. But you can also just display a video conference screen on top of, you know, a board that you're collaborating on, a Google document or something like that. And there are a lot of different things that you can work on together. So for the workshop in part 2, what we'll be using is we'll be using Mural, but there's also Miro, a similar tool which allow you to do something like this, to essentially have digital post-its that everyone sees and can edit and share together. You can achieve many of the same things in PowerPoint or Google Slides as well with little squares. If you use Office 365, you can actually create a shared set of slides that a whole bunch of people can come in and edit together and put little post-its on or shapes and different things like that. And then there's Google Jamboard, which is a free service that you can also use to lay out post-its. So it's not just Mural, but there are a lot of different services or things that enable participants to have something to work on together, right? So you're going multimodal in your workshop. You're occupying their sort of screen space with something to do in addition to watching and hearing. Call on people. I really, really recommend making this clear at the beginning of a workshop and to actually do it, right? The fact is that if you ask people to speak up and you leave it open to people to do that, then you'll have the people who are most comfortable with the technology, with speaking up, actually do that. And so I really like to actually pick people that I'd like to hear from, right? So, you know, Pauline, what did you think about that topic? And then, you know, I'll call upon a couple of different people, and then I'll create space for people to add to that. I think it really makes a workshop more interactive and less awkward. You know, one of the things I'm sure you've noticed, and you will notice more if you do facilitation for digital workshops, is that the blank space, the silent time on a video call is so much more awkward than silent time in person. And so as a facilitator, you can really make a conversation go smoothly by calling on people to do things. The second last thing I'll say about designing workshops is you want to design for all 3 layers of the experience, right? So in a workshop, there's often the official workshop. So this is the program, the series of events and activities that you're going to be doing. But you also have the unofficial workshop. And so you talk to people about, you know, why they go to a certain workshop and what they find most useful about it. And they'll tell you lots of things. And a lot of those things don't have to do with the content of the workshop or the conference, right? They're, oh, you know, they get the chance to meet with government officials and build relationships that actually they might not otherwise have access to, right? Or maybe, you know, I was talking to someone who's organizing a conference, a digital conference last week, who says, you know, as part of our conference, we have a number of NGOs that get together on the side and they write a statement together. Right? So these are some of the unofficial things that might not actually be part of your program, but are actually really valuable parts of the experience, right? And so you don't want to lose those as you move your conference online, because it means that it will be much less relevant and much less valuable to those participants. So I think that there's a really important piece where you don't just want to design for your official workshop, but you also want to design for the unofficial value of the workshop. How am I going to intentionally design those opportunities to network with government officials that might otherwise be hard to access? How am I going to create a space for NGOs to get together on the side and write a statement and work effectively while the conference is also happening? And then the last piece is the emotional experience. So the process of getting people to commit to something or getting them engaged or involved in something, what's often a goal of a workshop or a conference, has an emotional aspect to it as well. I spoke with an organization that frequently does product launches, and they do this in an auditorium. There's a launch, and they're kind of key senior leaders that come in and provide feedback, right? And at the end, you know, this person was saying, at the end, we leave with this sense of energy and uplift, right? Well, that's not going to work if you directly translate a that format into a webinar, have someone present on the webinar, and then have a few people give feedback. You're going to need to engage people a little bit differently to create that uplift and that sense of energy and that emotional experience. One thing I really want to highlight about this is that this is about what participants think is valuable, not what you think is. What you think is valuable is often the piece at the top, right? That's what we all design. But if you ask participants, you know, what were some of the most valuable moments in some of your past workshops or experiences or conferences, you might discover some things that are really surprising and that you'll want to think about, okay, how do we actually design these pieces in? So the last piece I'll just say is that if it needed facilitation in person, it'll need more facilitation when you do it online. This aspect of having kind of 5-10-minute micro exercises that are time boxed, that puts a lot more pressure on facilitators. You may also need small group facilitators in breakout rooms. I saw someone ask a question about that in the Q&A. And the reason for that is you've got a lot of new variables at play, especially with people not being used to doing online workshops and conferences, people who aren't used to the technology. And so really having people who can hold participants' hands and guide them through is really important. And to do that in a way that doesn't distract, you know, from the content. If you have one person, and how many people do we have? 430 people, right? I cannot run a facilitation that involves all of you, engages all of you just by myself. I'll definitely need assistance to do it. So keep in mind that you need digital facilitators if you're running digital sessions, just as you need offline or in-person facilitators to run in-person sessions. And in fact, the pressure on them is going to be even greater when they're running digital workshops. So these are the 6 things that I've talked about. You want to make that experience really human. You know, when we get on these tools and these technologies to put people together, we often don't do the things that actually bring that human touch back in. And so you want to be intentional about bringing that back in. We want to go beyond an agenda to designing a specific process, a set of steps that get people, you know, from the start of that 1-hour session to the end of that 1-hour session, having done something productively. You want to leverage multitasking productively. So people are going to multitask. And the question is, are they multitasking around what you're doing and what you're talking about, or are they multitasking on their email and other things that are distractions? 4 is call on people. Keep them engaged and keep that conversation going by really directing traffic in that conversation. Make it clear to people at the beginning that you're going to do that. But also, I should say, give them time to think about their responses. Design for all 3 layers. So you've got the emotional workshop, you've got the official workshop, you've got the unofficial workshop, and of course, you've got that emotional layer to your workshop. And then lastly, if it needed a facilitator in person, it will need more facilitation online. So I'd